Hi, good evening. How have you been? So there's been a bit of a hiatus on Giri's Adda past couple of days, and I thought I must continue with some reflections today. If possible, a song or two. Let me see how it goes. What I've been wanting to talk about is something that's been on my mind for some time now. I've been wanting to share it, and I've written about it, of course, but this is the first time that I'm actually going to be talking about it. So basically, I'm going to be focusing on the pandemic, the Covid-19 pandemic, that's kind of turned our lives upside down. It has brought in a world that is going to be irreversibly different. It has upended our lives. It has thrown almost everything out of gear. How we work, how we learn, how we interact with each other, how we eke out our livelihoods. A lot of these things are now changed forever, or for a very long time at least. There are two broad ways of looking at all these changes. One is, of course, an anxiety-ridden way, in which we stumble from one thing to the other as we move forward into that great unknown. The unknown is there. I mean, it's real. You cannot do anything about it. We still do not have a handle on this microorganism that we cannot even see, which has disrupted our lives in such a manner and on such a grand scale. As people keep saying, we are probably living through history, and if we are able to live through this for a long time, I'm sure we'll be telling stories to our children, grandchildren, and so on and so forth as we go along. So one is that anxiety-ridden way. The other is to look at this as an opportunity or multiple opportunities. Again, with respect to how we live, work, relate with each other, how we learn, how we educate, how we travel, how we do everything, how we live on the whole. So there are many, many opportunities, I think, in a challenge like this and in an adversity like this. And it is some of these opportunities that I would like to talk about more, rather than focusing only on the unknowns and the anxieties of the future and so on. I work in the field of education, in the field of school education. That's where I've been located over the last, I should say now 27, 28 years. And as somebody who is deeply concerned about the way we provide opportunities for learning for our children, especially those children who come from very difficult and challenged situations and backgrounds. The question about what this pandemic means, the impacts that it has created for the processes of learning, school-based learning, formal learning, organized learning, institutionalized learning. These are the various ways in which we describe what happens in school. That whole structure is now defunct, at least for some time, has been disrupted. Schools are closed. Teachers are not going to schools. Of course, I'm not broad brushing this. There are in many communities, for example, in the state where I work in Chhattisgarh, teachers, deeply, highly dedicated, motivated, very caring teachers are managing to go back into the communities where their schools were located, right? but a large number of teachers are not doing that. And they're either too far away to make a difference, located too far away, or they wouldn't bother so much. So what I'm going to be sharing now is a set of experiences in 2 or 3 parts. One is, what are some of our experiences of addressing the educational or the learning challenge? That is going to be the main topic of my sharing this evening. What have we done about it? I work with UNICEF, and there are a few exciting things that we have done, but I'll briefly focus on this. I'm not going to, get very deeply inside this story. What I'm going to delve upon a little more is the conceptual and the practical possibilities that this pandemic offers us to rethink the way we do education. So many of these things that I'm going to share are not new. They have been, they continue to be discussed. Over the last 4 or 5 months, they have been talked about. But then looking at it from a different vantage point sometimes helps. So first of all, schools are closed. Anganwadis, that is preschools, are also closed. We do not know when they're going to open. So the argument, of course, for those who are working in education is that, what about children's learning? In a country where we routinely see very abysmal results on learning surveys, whether it's the National Achievement Survey or the of the Government of India, or the Annual Status of Education Report by NGOs such as Pratham, both these sets of surveys do not portray or show a very positive picture. In fact, they show a very grim picture about what children manage to learn after spending several years in schooling. Right? Now that itself, or whatever little learning was happening in school, is itself in danger of being taken back several years. The deficits that the children already carried from one grade to the other in terms of how much they should have learned, how much they should have understood about themselves, about the world in which they live, about their abilities to write, read, express, question. All of these things are in jeopardy because of this prolonged period of lockdown of these institutionalized structures that we call school, where children learn in an organized manner according to a timetable, according to a curriculum, and according to a teaching plan. The question is, what do we do now, right? In March, when we set out to do certain things to respond to the situation as part of the work that UNICEF is doing, I heard several people, both within the NGO world, the civil society organizations, as well as people in government, telling me that, look, why are you bothered? In any case, schools are going to open in June. So at the most, children will lose out on 1 month of learning towards the end of the academic year. In Chhattisgarh, schools closed by around end April, and the lockdown was in effect around, I think, 15th to 20th March for the schools. So they said it's not going to be much of a deal. Just let it be. June 15th, anyway, schools will open, and life will be normal. I was doubtful. I said, look, hang on. This doesn't feel as if it's going to be like that. Right now, the numbers may be small. Right now, we may be still moving around. I mean, we were in a pre-COVID world where moving around anywhere at any time and doing, we took our freedoms for granted. I think we are now realizing the value of those freedoms. So I was skeptical, and I think as the first lockdown, that brutal first lockdown happened, and we moved into the second lockdown, slowly I think people started realizing that things are not going to be the same. So at that time we designed a program called a Seek, which was trying to cater to children's learning in two complementary ways. One is, of course, at the bottom of it all, we realize that children's engagement with their learning is something that cannot be disrupted. Now, when we talk of learning, there are so many things that children learn. There are so many things that children learn outside of school, outside of their textbooks, outside of what their teachers say. That learning is something that is happening to all of us, even as adults. So it happens to children. They learn by seeing people in their families, they learn from their siblings, they learn from their friends in the community, they learn from just observing things. So there's a very natural and organic process of learning. And that natural and organic process of learning from everyday life experience was also, I think, infused by this pandemic situation. Suddenly there was a disruption, villages closed down, cities and towns closed down. So in any case, if one argues it from that side, children have never stopped learning. They've suddenly seen, their parents lose livelihoods. Children belonging to, for example, daily wage laborers, or parents who are working in the industries, small scale, or those whose parents have a small petty shop. So a lot of these, children are seeing many things disrupted immediately. Of course, we've also seen the very, very heartrending stories of migrant workers returning home, often walking hundreds and thousands of kilometers. No warning. The lockdown was put into effect very suddenly, with barely 4 to 6 hours of time for people to even figure out what they needed to do. So in that sense, I think it was very badly planned. So, and so many of us have seen and heard those stories of trauma, those stories of death, as people walked, home, carrying whatever little belongings they had, carrying their children, the old and the, needy and pregnant women, children, and so on. So there is, of course, a lot of learning from that experience. I know it sounds very painful when I say this, but then adversity has its own ways of teaching us a great many things. I'm not at all denying all of that. What schools offer, on the other hand, through the core curriculum, and what they should be offering, is the opportunity for children to learn certain areas called as language, mathematics, science, and so on and so forth. And all these disciplines are meant to be encouraging the child as a young human being to learn to express, to, of course, pick up the core, skills of reading, writing, use these tools to understand themselves and the world in which they live in a better manner. So I think in the broadest sense, this is what schools are supposed to be doing. The fact that they don't do it, and the fact that there's so much of what we call as rote learning happening from the point of view of getting grades and so on, is a matter of deep concern, and we should come back to that concern at some other point of time. But schools, apart from this learning, schools also offer the space to socialize. You meet friends. In fact, many children just go to school to meet their friends, like many of us did, right? So just being with your friends, just seeing things happening, interacting, that human interaction, even if precious little of language or mathematics or science is learned, that human interaction is something that makes you more confident. It teaches you to share, it teaches you to listen, it teaches you to collaborate, it teaches you to learn. There's so much of an emotional growth there, which is, I think, denied in this pandemic, because all those structures have been put on hold, and we don't know when those structures are going to resume their business. I don't think even the Ministry of Human Resource Development knows or can put a date as to when schools are going to reopen in India. Some say October, some say maybe by November, some say, I just read a news item today that says that it's not going to happen till December, so we are already pushing it into next year. So let me then move on from here and look at what is the possibility. What do we do in this situation? So very quickly, what we did was we designed a program that offered opportunities through online platforms like WhatsApp groups to take messages down to the parents and their children and to see if parents could use their smart devices to access the little videos that we were making, the little worksheets that we were sharing, and sit with their children and kind of support them and make them do some interesting activities in language, mathematics and games. So we focused a lot on sports because we believe that that's something that can help in a psychosocial sense, in an emotional sense. It helps you to release a lot of energy. It is fun and it's very important. And I think unfortunately in our schools, government schools in particular, this area is something that has been completely neglected, and we must get to this at a later stage when we keep talking about the various facets of education. So this was one side of it, the online story. We also realized that in a state like Chhattisgarh, the online story can be very limited, maybe not more than 10%, 15%, at best estimates. I mean, anybody who says that one-third of the children in Chhattisgarh or more are able to learn using online means, I think I would definitely disagree. I would have my question marks about that. Maybe 15 to 20% at the most. Even there it's doubtful. Are the devices available when they are supposed to? What about connectivity and so on? What about the additional costs that parents will incur in terms of downloading stuff that is provided online? So there are so many angles to it, so many layers to this online business. And also I think I've sat in many of the online classes that are held. The online is only a medium, right? Your classes or your teaching learning process magically doesn't get transformed just because a teacher is doing an online class. If a teacher has a very traditional, conventional, prejudiced, limited mindset, as a person, in terms of how he or she sees learning and how she or she views education and children, then just giving a WebEx session or a Zoom session or whatever other platform that you use doesn't magically transform that teacher to be doing something very interesting and so on. And we know that online has its limitations in terms of age. So for young children, the ones who are in preschool, the ones who are going to primary school, at least up till the age of 10 or 12, a lot of adult guidance and moderation is necessary. Slightly older children are in a position to learn on their own, and perhaps there an online class which has some quality, which encourages participation, which encourages questioning, which is interesting, perhaps that can continue in some sense the process of self-learning. So the second thing that we realized is that in order to overcome the online part of it, we need to do something offline. And here we, wherever we did our program called as SEEK, or learning for short, we advocated with the district administration that you should look at creating a volunteer base in the communities. Just go around and ask people if they're interested in doing something good, and invariably you will find 4 to 5, 10 people in a village who will say, or in the community who will say, yeah, we want to now use our time, we also don't know what to do, and we can do something good for our community. And when you talk to them about working with children and supporting their learning, they're very happy to do that. We've been able to do that on a fairly large scale in the engagements that we have, and about 8 to 10,000 volunteers are now associated with this initiative across 10 districts. In some districts more, in some districts less, but then it is so heartwarming to see the leadership in the districts, the collector, the CEO, Zilla Parishad, the Samagra Siksha, district level officials, block level, cluster level, and the teachers themselves. So that is the second part. We are deepening that. We are looking at how community participation through these volunteers can increase and can be sustained over a period of time. When I look back, when I just stand back and see what we have done, sometimes what happens is when you're in the thick of doing something, you barely are in a position to notice the general directions in which you're moving, because the immediate needs of the engagement are so immense and so urgent that we don't have the time to pause. I think I want to now pause, and as I start pausing, I realize that there are two fundamental things that we're doing which we have missed doing in the field of education for decades. They may have been sometimes written about, but at best we have paid lip service. So to begin with, I think we have put all our eggs in the basket that we call a school, and that seems to be the fundamental problem. Everything cannot depend on that teacher, whether there's a single teacher or a group of teachers. After all, the child is spending up to 6 hours in a school. Remaining time is spent at home with parents and other adult members in the family, siblings. And then a lot of time is spent in the neighborhood playing with friends, older children, younger children, and others in the community, right? So these two spaces outside of school, which can offer so much in terms of providing children great opportunities to learn, are not taken or exploited by the government, whether it's the national level or the state level or even the district level, right? There are certain fundamental problems over here. One is when you talk of parents supporting children, I think people have a very dim view of parental involvement in the first place, parental participation in the child's education. The health and nutrition section seem to have cracked that a little in terms of creating awareness within parents about how to look after their children when they are ill and how to feed them, what to feed them, all of that. So all of these are topics of a lot of schemes and campaigns that the government keeps running. So those messages have hit home. You have the Asha worker, the Anganwadi worker, taking all these messages there. And then you have a lot of self-help groups created within communities which are also aware of many of these things. But when you talk of education, when you talk of supporting children and their learning, in other words, their cognitive development, their socio-emotional development and so on, I think we parents generally leave these things to the preschool or the school. They step back. And especially with the parents who are semi-literate or illiterate, non-literate, they are even more, lacking in confidence in terms of what they can do. Our experience in the last 4 months shows that need not be the case. Number one, parents are anxious. They want their children to learn. They're very concerned that schools have closed, and they want to keep their children engaged. They want their children to keep thinking about something. They want their children to be applying their minds. They want their children to be learning something, right? If, as we have shown in this program, if we are able to cater to parents and create a communication, a conversation with them about what they can do, spending time with children, for example, right? Talking to them, sharing their experiences from their own lives. And with the kind of materials that we are developing and with the kind of materials that the government is developing, even if you're a non-literate parent, spend some time, look at that material, ask your child some questions, ask your child to read that and talk about it with you, and so on and so forth. So I think parents generally can provide a lot of emotional support that is needed for learning to happen, for cognitive engagement to happen in children. And it's a culture that needs to be developed inside of homes, of spending time with your children, of talking to them, and of overcoming your own limitations and your own lack of self-belief that you can do it. I think that's the first challenge. And that's an area which I think can give us very rich results. And our own work in Chhattisgarh through a program called as Sajak several years ago shows that when parents of young children below 6 years, begin to respond to their children's developmental needs in very positive ways, the results are remarkable. We have some very, very good quantitative evidence about what parental support at home can do for these young children, and I would like to believe that they can also do a lot for their school-going children as well. The second point, and very quickly, is this whole community space. And I think there also, unfortunately, within government, we have created paper structures like school management committees, which are largely existing on paper. They're supposed to be managing schools, but we don't allow them to do that because everything has to be controlled from the top. This letting go, which is so important in education, to allow decentralized decisions to take place, just does not happen. And in this pandemic, we have seen how communities have risen to that challenge. It is so heartwarming to see the living rooms, the verandas, the bedrooms, the terraces, the corridors, the angans, the backyards, any open space available being taken over by parents and community representatives like youth and other people who are willing to give time to their children, who are engaging with their children through games, through learning activities of various kinds that have been provided, and they're asking for more. If something doesn't happen, if these activities are not sent on time, there are many phone calls, there are demands for more. So suddenly I think this pandemic, by shutting off the schools, has allowed other spaces to emerge, and has allowed us, or given us a chance to exploit those spaces, to see what we can do with those spaces. And I would like to believe that these developments should not die away when schools reopen. That's the last thing I want to say. I think this adversity, this pandemic, gives us the chance to ignite other spaces, to activate other spaces outside of school, which are very, very critical from the point of view of ensuring children's development and learning. And one space is the family. Can we continue to engage with families? Can we relook adult education, which is all but dead, I think, in practically every state of India? Can we relook how we get communities and harness the positive energy that's there in the community to take care of its children, to take care of their, overall development, including their thinking skills, including their reading, writing, including their curiosity, their expression, and so on. And if we can sustain this through government support and action, through well thought out and well designed programs. What about the panchayats? The panchayats are elected representatives, right? In the Right to Education Act, they're vested with the responsibility of being a local authority for education. But on the ground, we have not done anything about it. I wonder, even if in the Panchayati Raj department, if people even know what they're meant to be doing for education. That's because we have created legislation, we have created policies. We have not really done much to operationalize those policies. I think that's the point, that I'm also making as I share these other issues. So if we are able to do this, then I think we will be able to actualize an idea which is very much integral to many African cultures. And it's encapsulated through a statement which goes like this: it takes a village to raise a child. And you apply that to education, you find that it can take a village, or it takes a village to educate a child. So let the teacher be there, let the school be there, and let's try and make that space better and better and better. It's going to take a long time, and we need to wish ourselves all the best for that. I'm not taking a dim view, I'm only looking at the realities. But then let's also look at who are the other partners available, the parents and other members in that community in which the child lives. So I hope that some of these thoughts resonate with the way you're seeing things, and the great hope, of course, is that we'll all, put our heads together, during these difficult and challenging times, but times full of opportunity to really rethink the way we do education, rethink the way we provide learning for children. I hope you like these reflections. Take care and keep engaging with Girizada. Bye-bye.